Welcome to Burned and Betrayed, stories of trust broken and lessons learned.
The call came at 6:47 in the morning, not from my son, from my neighbor, Carol, who had watched his family grow up from her kitchen window for 31 years. Her voice was careful, the way people sound when they're trying to soften something that cannot be softened. She told me she was sorry to bother me in the hospital. Then she told me what she saw. My son's truck in the driveway, a locksmith van parked at the curb, 3 black trash bags on the front lawn, bulging at the seams, and my daughter-in-law, Renee, standing on the porch with her arms crossed, watching the locksmith work, a coffee mug in her hand like she was watching a sunrise she'd been waiting a long time to see. I thanked Carol. I set the phone down on the hospital blanket. Outside the window, the morning was gray and quiet, the kind of morning that doesn't apologize for anything. I had gone in for a routine gallbladder procedure. 67 years old, strong as a draft horse according to my doctor, and I'd be home in 2 days. 2 days. That's all it took for my son Marcus to decide that 2 days was long enough to call a locksmith, stuff my belongings into garbage bags, and plant his flag on ground that was never, not for a single day of his life, his to claim. I lay there for a long moment with my hands flat on the blanket. I thought about the house. I thought about the morning I broke ground on it with a borrowed shovel. 22 years old, just married, with $40 in my checking account and a stubbornness my father said would either save me or bury me. I thought about the 39 years I spent inside those walls. I thought about Eleanor, my late wife, who would press her handprints into wet concrete at the base of the back porch steps, laughing while the cement dried, saying she wanted to leave a mark on something that would outlast her. She had. She did. I thought about the first time I held Marcus in that house, fresh from the hospital, wrapped in a yellow blanket, so small I was afraid to breathe too hard. And then I thought about something else. Something quiet and specific and sharp as a surveyor's pin driven into cold ground. I thought about the deed. Not the house deed. The land deed. I pressed the call button for my nurse, asked her if I could borrow a phone charger, and then I picked up my phone and dialed my attorney. Let me tell you about Marcus first, because the story doesn't make sense without him. And I want to be fair, because I spent 30 years trying to be fair to that boy, even when fairness cost me more than I had to give. Marcus was our only child. Eleanor and I tried for more, and we lost too, and after a while we stopped trying and poured everything we had into him. Everything. Private school, when we could barely afford it. A car at 16, secondhand but clean. College, paid for, no loans. When he graduated and landed a decent job in pharmaceutical sales, I remember sitting at that graduation dinner thinking, we did it. Whatever else happens, we got this part right. But somewhere between 22 and 35, something curdled in Marcus. I don't know exactly when it happened. It was gradual, the way erosion is gradual. You don't notice the riverbank shrinking until the tree falls in. By the time he met Renee, he had already developed a talent for convenience, for being warm when he needed something and cold when he didn't. Renee didn't create that quality in him. She simply recognized it and cultivated it. The way a gardener knows which vine to water. Renee was charming on the surface, the kind of charming that has sharp edges underneath if you press on it. She called me dad in public and avoided my eyes in private. She smiled at everything I said, but the smile never changed, never moved past her cheekbones. She had opinions about the house, about how old it looked, about the neighborhood, which she called dated, about my furniture, which she called heavy. She said these things lightly as jokes, and if you flinched, she called you sensitive. After Eleanor died 3 years ago, things shifted. I saw it happening, and I told myself I was imagining it. Grief plays tricks. You see shadows where there are only walls. But I was not imagining it. Marcus started visiting less. When he did visit, he walked through the house differently, slowly, appraisingly. The way a person walks through a house, they are already mentally redecorating. He asked me once, casually, what my plans were for the place long term. I told him I planned to live in it. He laughed. Right, of course, he said, but long term. I told him that was my long-term plan. He didn't bring it up again. Not directly. Eleanor's will had left the house structure to Marcus. It was something we had set up years ago, before I understood what years ago Marcus would become, back when estate planning felt like an act of love and not a chess move someone else would exploit. The structure, the building itself, the walls, the roof, the floors, the fixtures, all of it went to Marcus upon the death of the surviving spouse, which at that point would be me, which meant was mine to live in until I was gone. Eleanor had made that clear. She had loved Marcus fiercely, but she had also known him. She said to me once, in the last weeks, she said, The house is his inheritance, but make sure you keep the land. I nodded. I had kept the land. I had kept it quietly, in my name alone, since the day I bought it, long before Eleanor and I were married, long before Marcus was born, long before any of this. The land, 8,400 square feet of earth in a quiet suburban neighborhood, purchased when I was 21 years old with money I had earned working 2 jobs and sleeping 5 hours a night. The house was built on that land. The house that Marcus believed was now his. The house he had apparently decided, while I was sedated and stitched up 40 miles away, to simply take. I had my attorney, Gerald Fitch, on the phone inside 4 minutes of Carol's call. Gerald had handled my family's legal affairs for 18 years. He was methodical and precise and had a voice like gravel on a tin roof. And when I explained what Marcus had done, he went quiet for exactly 3 seconds before he said, "Well, that's unfortunate for Marcus." I asked Gerald to remind me of the terms of the ground lease agreement. Gerald reminded me. When Marcus inherited the house structure, I had simultaneously drawn up a ground lease, the legal arrangement by which a property owner leases a land beneath a structure to the structure's owner. It is common in commercial real estate. It is less common in residential situations, but it is entirely legal, entirely enforceable, and in our case, entirely signed. Marcus had signed it 18 months ago, during the estate settlement. Surrounded by lawyers and notarized documents in the fog of fresh grief, he had signed a ground lease agreement that gave him a right to occupy the land beneath his inherited house on specific terms, including a monthly ground lease payment, a set of maintenance conditions, and a termination clause. The termination clause. Gerald read it to me from memory, because Gerald is the kind of attorney who reads things from memory. The clause stated that in the event of material breach of the lease terms, including unauthorized modification of the property, unauthorized exclusion of the landowner from the premises, or any act constituting unlawful lockout of the landowner, the landowner retained the right to terminate the ground lease with 30 days' notice, at which point the structure owner would be required to vacate the land, and if the structure could not be vacated, the structure owner would bear full financial and legal responsibility for the removal or demolition of the structure at their own expense. I asked Gerald what an unauthorized lockout would qualify as. Gerald said it would qualify as a material breach. I told him about the locksmith van, about the trash bags on the lawn, about Carol watching from her kitchen window. Gerald said he would need me to get him Carol's contact information and whatever documentation I could pull together. He said he would begin drafting the termination notice. I said, "Gerald, I'd like to do this correctly. I'd like to make sure every single step is done by the book, and there is no room for argument." Gerald said, "That's exactly how I intend to do it." I said, "Good." And then I asked him one more thing. I asked him not to contact Marcus yet. Not until I was ready. I was discharged the following morning. My recovery was smooth, my doctor satisfied. My instructions simple: rest, light activity, no heavy lifting for 2 weeks. I followed the instructions. I checked into a hotel 4 miles from my house with a small bag of things I'd had in the hospital with me. I ordered soup from the diner down the street. I slept 9 hours. And while I slept, Gerald Fitch was working. Meanwhile, Marcus and Renee had apparently wasted no time making themselves a home. Carol kept me informed, bless her heart, in the careful detailed way only a woman who has lived on the same block for 31 years can. She told me the moving truck arrived the second day. She told me Renee had ordered new throw pillows. She could see the packages on the porch. She told me Marcus had walked the perimeter of the property with a man who had a clipboard, possibly a contractor, possibly a real estate assessor. She couldn't be sure. She told me Renee had posted on her social media. She had checked because her granddaughter followed Renee, a photograph of the living room with the caption, "Finally home. Finally home." I read that caption sitting in a hotel chair eating soup, and I felt something move through me that was not quite anger and not quite grief. It was something older than both of those. Something that felt like the sensation of watching a door swing shut on a room you built with your own hands, and knowing with absolute certainty that you still had the key. On day 4, Marcus called me. I had been wondering when he would. He had not called while I was in the hospital. Not once. Not to ask how the procedure went. Not to check on my recovery. Not even a text message with a thumbs up emoji. Nothing. And now, on day 4, with the moving truck presumably unloaded and the new throw pillows arranged and the assessor's clipboard presumably full of notes, now he called. I let it ring twice. Then I answered. He said, "Hey, Dad, just checking in. How are you feeling?" I said I was feeling fine, recovering well. "Thank you for asking." He said, Good, glad to hear it." He paused. Then he said, "Hey, listen, I want to talk to you about the house." He said it the way people say things they have rehearsed. Smooth and quick, no stumble. He said that he and Renee had been thinking about it for a while, and given that the house legally came to him through Mom's estate, and given that he was at a point in his life where he really needed a stable situation, they had made the decision to move in. He said he hoped I understood. He said there were some great senior living communities in the area, really nice ones, very active. He said Renee had actually done some research and found a few options she thought I might like. I listened to all of it, every word. I made a small sound every few sentences to let him know I was still on the line. When he finished, I said, "Marcus, where are my belongings?" He paused. He said, "We put some things in storage. We're still sorting through it all. We'll get everything organized and you can come by and pick up what you want." I said, "The photo albums. Eleanor's photo albums." Another pause. Shorter this time. He said they were in storage. They were fine. He had been careful. I said, "Okay." I said I appreciated him letting me know. I said I was still resting, and I'd be in touch soon. He sounded relieved. He probably thought that was too easy. He probably hung up that phone and told Renee I had rolled over, just like that the old man had folded without a fight. He probably poured himself something to drink and felt very pleased with himself. He probably looked around the living room at the new throw pillows and thought, "We did it." I spent the next 2 weeks doing exactly what my doctor told me to do. I rested. I took short walks. I ate well. I read. I had long phone calls with Gerald, who was meticulous and thorough, and working with the focused satisfaction of a man who genuinely enjoys his craft. I gathered documentation. Carol provided a signed statement detailing what she had witnessed the morning of the locksmith. I obtained the hotel records as evidence of my displacement. Gerald pulled the original ground lease, the property records, the land deed, all of it clean and clear and airtight as a sealed room. On day 16 after my discharge, Gerald filed the ground lease termination notice. It was delivered to Marcus by certified mail and simultaneously by a process server on a Tuesday morning at 8:43, which Carol later told me was approximately 12 minutes after Marcus had left for work and Renee was alone in the house. I heard about Renee's reaction secondhand from Carol, who described it as a woman standing on the porch holding a piece of paper and looking like she had touched an electric fence. She stood there for almost 4 minutes. Carol said, just standing, reading, rereading, holding the paper in both hands. Then she went inside, and the door closed, and 2 minutes later Carol could see through the window that Renee was on the phone, moving fast through the kitchen, hand pressed to the side of her head. Marcus called me 47 minutes later. He did not begin with hello. He said, "What is this?" I said, "I assume you're calling about the legal notice." He said, "Dad, what is this? What does this mean? There must be some mistake. You need to call this off. Call your lawyer and call this off right now." I said, "There's no mistake. Marcus." He said, "You can't do this. This is my house. Mom left me this house. You can't just take it back." I said, "I'm not taking the house. I'm terminating the ground lease. The house is still yours. The land beneath it is mine and always has been, and you're no longer permitted to use it." There was a silence then that I won't forget. It was the silence of a man hearing something his brain is refusing to process, like a language he doesn't speak being spoken directly into his ear. He said, "What does that even mean?" I said, "It means you have 30 days to remove the structure from my land." He said, "Remove the structure? What does that mean, remove the structure? It's a house. Dad, it's a house. You can't move a house." I said, "Actually, you can. It's expensive and it's logistically complicated, but it's possible. Or you can have it demolished. Those are your options. Gerald can send you the relevant documentation if you'd like to review it." He said my name. He said it the way he used to say it, when he was a little boy and had done something wrong, and was hoping I would absorb the consequences for him. Just my name, in that particular register. "Dad." I said, "Marcus, you changed the locks while I was in the hospital. You put my belongings in trash bags. You called senior living communities and sent me brochures. You moved into my home without a conversation, without my consent, without so much as a phone call while I was in a hospital bed 40 miles away." He started to say something. I said, "I'm going to need you to not be on my land at the end of 30 days. Then I ended the call. What happened over the next 3 weeks was, depending on your perspective, either a legal catastrophe or a masterclass in consequences. Marcus hired an attorney. His attorney reviewed the ground lease and called Gerald. Gerald said the document was clean. Marcus's attorney reviewed it again. It was still clean. Marcus's attorney apparently told him that the termination was valid, the clause was enforceable, and that barring some extraordinary legal development, he was looking at the prospect of either moving a house or losing one. Moving a house, a full-size suburban home with foundation and plumbing and electrical and 39 years of structural history, is not a metaphor. It is a physical undertaking that requires structural engineers and house movers and permits and transportation logistics and a destination parcel of land that you have already owned or purchased. And it costs, depending on the size and distance and conditions, somewhere between $40,000 and $200,000 on the low end, often far more. Marcus did not have that kind of money. Renee did not have that kind of money. They had a combined income, 2 car payments, a furniture credit line they'd opened 6 weeks prior, and a brand new set of throw pillows. They tried everything. Their attorney filed a motion challenging the ground lease's applicability to residential inheritance. It was denied. They argued that my lockout claim was exaggerated. Carol's signed statement, combined with a locksmith's invoice obtained through discovery, made that argument difficult to sustain. They contacted a local news outlet suggesting an elderly father was being manipulated by a predatory legal technicality. The reporter who called Gerald received a very thorough explanation of the facts and published nothing. They reached out to 2 of my cousins, asking them to intervene. My cousins called me. I thanked them and told them I had it handled. Marcus called me 7 times in the second week. I answered 4 of them. Each conversation followed a similar arc. He would begin with anger, move to bargaining, arrive at something approaching pleading, and I would listen and say very little. Once he cried. It was the first time I had heard him cry since he was 9 years old and had broken his arm falling from the oak tree in the backyard. I sat with that sound for a moment. I am not made of stone. I won't be honest about that. There was a part of me that felt the weight of it. 39 years of raising a child does not vanish because that child grows into someone who puts your late wife's photo albums in a storage unit while you're in a hospital bed. The love is still there. It's just standing next to something else now. Something that has to be honored. I said to him, on that call, Marcus, I want you to hear me. I am not doing this to destroy you. I am doing this because you made a decision about my life without asking me, and there have to be consequences to that. Or there is no truth left between us. When this is over, if you want to have a real conversation, I will have it. But not before. He said, there won't be anything left to talk about. I said, that's your choice. On day 28, Marcus and Renee vacated the property. They moved into Renee's sister's house, a 2-bedroom rental situation that I was told, again through the reliable Carol network, was not a comfortable arrangement for anyone involved. The house stayed standing on my land because demolishing it was quicker and cheaper than moving it, but they couldn't afford that either. So they walked away from it entirely legally, formally, signing over the structure rights back to me as part of a negotiated resolution that Gerald handled with the same precise calm he brought to everything. They got nothing. The furniture they had moved in, some of it still in boxes, some of it assembled and already scratched from the move. They took what they could fit in the truck and left the rest. I drove back to the house on a Thursday afternoon. 31 days after Carol's phone call had woken me in a hospital bed. The front lawn needed mowing. There was a package on the porch. Some online order Renee had placed that had arrived after they left. One of the new throw pillows was still on the porch swing, left behind, cream-colored, still tagged. I picked it up and set it inside the door. I walked through the room slowly. The living room looked different with their things removed. Lighter, somehow, there were faint marks on the hardwood where their furniture had sat. The kitchen had new contact paper in the drawers, which struck me as almost funny, the small act of domestic nesting in a house they had inhabited for less than a month. The back porch was exactly as I had left it. Eleanor's handprints in the concrete at the base of the steps, still there, as I had known they would be, her fingers pressed into permanence 20 years ago, outlasting every version of things, as she always said she would. I sat on the porch step for a while. Just sat. The yard was quiet. The oak tree Marcus had fallen from when he was 9 still stood at the far end of the property, older and thicker than it was then, full of its own history. A neighbor's dog barked somewhere down the street. The light was doing that late afternoon thing where it comes in sideways. It makes everything look like a painting of itself. I thought about Eleanor. I thought about what she would say. She would probably have something sharp and funny to say about the throw pillow. She would probably say something about Marcus that was sad and true in equal measure, because she loved him and she knew him, and those two things had never been able to fully protect each other from what the other one was. I thought about what I had done and whether it was the right thing, and I want to be honest with you. I believe it was not because I wanted to punish my son, not because I am a hard man who doesn't feel things, but because there's a version of love that requires you hold a line even when holding it is painful, especially when holding it is painful, because the alternative is a slow dissolution of truth, and a life built on untruth is not a life. It's just a series of accommodations made out of fear. Marcus knew what he was doing when he called that locksmith. He knew I was alive, recovering, and would need somewhere to come home to. He chose to make that choice anyway, and to dress in the language of practicality, of senior living brochures and storage units and long-term planning, as though rearranging someone else's life without their knowledge is just logistics. It isn't. It's a declaration. And declarations have answers. I picked up my phone and called Carol to let her know I was home. She cried a little, which surprised me. She said she had been so worried. She said she had felt sick about the whole thing. I told her I was fine. I told her she had been a good neighbor and a good friend, and I was grateful. She said, "Come for dinner Sunday. I'm making that chicken you like." I said I would. I have not heard from Marcus since the resolution was finalized. I have thought about calling him, and maybe one day I will. And maybe one day he will call me. And maybe in that call there will be something real, something that isn't bargaining or anger or performance. Just two people who share 39 years and a grief and a complicated love, trying to find the honest ground beneath all of it. Maybe. I hold that possibility the way I hold a lot of things now. Carefully, with both hands, without forcing it. What I know is this. The house is mine. The land is mine. The handprints in the concrete at the back porch steps are Eleanor's, and they are not going anywhere. The oak tree at the far end of the yard is older than my son's entire understanding of who his father is, and it is still growing. And I am here. Still here. In the house I built at 22 with a borrowed shovel and $40, and a stubbornness my father warned me about. He was right. As it turns out, it did save me.